Hey you folks, Quill18 here, and welcome to another Unity programming tutorial where we continue our Project Porcupine base building game. Today what we're going to do is we're going to add some user interface elements. They're going to be pretty simplistic right now because we just don't have that many game features, but hopefully we'll start moving towards a really cool looking sort of user interface that can cover the multitude of features that we're hoping to cover in the future. What I have done here, I've imported, because I can't art, I've imported some images from the Great Keeney Asset Packs. This is some CC0 art assets, so you can distribute them and use them in any way whatsoever. It's a great little package that I've used before, so I've just imported a few little button sort of elements here that we might go ahead and play around with as well. We're probably not going to use this today, but I really like this sort of metal panel thing here that we can use to make like windows and dialog pop-ups and that sort of thing. But right now what we're going to do is we're just going to set up a couple of buttons, because if we run the game right now, of course, we're at the point where we do have our tile system that goes out, and we can click and drag, and we get a sort of a visual area representing what we're dragging. Later on, those icons are going to be replaced with something more relevant to what we're hovering over and trying to place. And right now, we can drag or click and place down some flooring tiles right on top of our randomly generated grid. But what we're lacking is the ability to go back and delete these tiles. And certainly, as we move very close to being able to place a variety of new objects on the map, for example, walls, doors, that sort of thing, we're going to want some sort of user interface, some sort of set of buttons, so that we can change what we're placing exactly over here. So let's go ahead and put some buttons down. We're going to use the built-in Unity UI system, the UI system in Unity. Not the old one, certainly, but the new one that's very easy to work with. You go Game Objects, and under UI here, you've got a bunch of different options. Canvas is always the base of the UI system, although if you go and you place something, any other UI element, it'll automatically create a canvas for you. So for example, let's say we want a button, which is right over here. We're going to click that, and in our hierarchy in a moment, there you go, you can see we've got a canvas, an event system, and beneath the canvas we get a button. The event system is the system responsible for managing internally to the Unity UI system, clicks and mouse buttons and keyboard presses and that sort of thing. And the canvas is the thing responsible for all your visual elements. Note that because the canvas uses a coordinate system that is basically pixel-based, right? It is very, very, very large. Right now, the height and width of the canvas is actually exactly the same as the game window over here. In fact, if I change the game window side, you can see, there we go. So the height changed to 571. If I do this, and you'd have to click off and click back on, the height changed to 686 over here. And if I double click on canvas, it'll move my scene view to encompass it. And it's already, you see, very, very large. You can see like my little Mars picture is that tiny little thing over here. And now we have this massive canvas, and the shape of this canvas will change based on what I do to the camera over here, because by default, the canvas just fills the entire camera view, and that's just the way it's always going to be. So we went ahead and created that button. Now I can go in my, again, in my scene view, not in the game view, the scene view, I can move this button around all over the place. But as we can also see, as I resize the window, sometimes the button doesn't really end up where we want it to be. So what we want to do is we want to set the anchor point of this button sort of relative to its parent. In this case, the parent of this button is the canvas. So if I go to the button over here, and I've got this bit over here, this is your anchor preset options, and it defaults to just having the anchor sort of in the middle of this particular object. But what you can do two things. If you hold Shift, you'll also set the pivot, and if you hold Alt, you'll also reposition things. The pivot is the thing that locks it to a particular corner. So for example, if I hold, because if I just click this to change the anchor, actually, I guess that's pretty much all. If I just click that to change the anchor, the button is now anchored to the bottom left corner of the view. So whatever happens to the window shape, the button is always going to be in the same position relative to the bottom left corner. And that becomes very handy if you also hold Alt and then click that. It'll move your button to the bottom left corner, and then it's like, all of a sudden, it's like pretty reasonable, because the button is just stuck there in the bottom left corner, which is probably what we want in this case. I mean, we've got lots of options. We can go, we can build a menu system up top where, you know, sort of your standard sort of Windows looking thing where you've got a menu like this. That would be easy to do. Doing that is basically means having some buttons. They will be styled slightly different, but effectively they will be buttons up here, and when you click on them, they will show another panel just underneath it, which is what the pop-up window is. These sorts of menus are pretty easy to do, and we probably will be doing something very similar to this later on. For now, we don't need that much stuff. We basically just need a button that says something like, So under button, there's the text object, right? Because I can have the button with or without text, although in this case we want the text. We can also incorporate icons here later on if we want, although I'm not sure that's really going to be called for, but certainly a text label makes sense. So let's say we want two buttons. One is going to be to place a floor, and the other one is going to be, I don't know, like a bulldoze button, a delete button, a destroy. We might want a different button for sort of deconstructing an object versus clearing away a floor tile. For now, that sort of distinction is a bit moot. So let's go ahead and label one button as being build floor. You can see the text updates there. And just for the sake of things, let's go ahead. I'm going to copy this text over here. And I'm going to, where we've got our actual button object, I'm going to go and rename it to be button-build floor. That way it's quite clear what's going on over here. If you haven't worked with the Unity UI system before, what is a button? Well, very simply, a button is an image, which is the background of the button you can see there, right? Just there's an image, which is the visual, and then it also has this button script on here. Now, technically, you don't need a button script. You could implement your own button logic directly if you want. It's actually not very hard to do. Basically, what you would do, well, it's as simple, honestly, as attaching an event trigger to this object over here and then adding an event for pointer click, for example. And then if you want to do something where the visuals change when you hover over the button, you could do something like pointer enter and pointer exit. So that's as your mouse goes on the object and off the object. Maybe you're going to want to change the look of it. Maybe you want to zoom in, zoom out, make the font bolder, change the color, all that sort of stuff. You can sort of make your own with the event trigger. But I'm going to remove this because the button script effectively sets up a lot of those defaults for us. And it's very, very handy to work with. The interactable just tells you whether this thing can be operated or not, and nicely it disables it to a gray color when that's happens by default, and you can tune that with the disabled color over here. So for example, we could say, listen, we want it to be bright yellow when it's disabled. Doesn't make much sense, but we could certainly do that. I'm going to undo it and go back to gray. And that's really what this little script does for it. Just makes things a little handy. We're going to leave it interactable. We are going to need to choose a graphic for it. By default, it's got a relatively decent sort of just, white triangle or white rectangle going around. It's one of the default images that is just built in to Unity for us. But let's actually have it use one of these nice little blue button graphics so we get to do something cool. So I've got a couple of variants here. I've got this one that's sort of raised up a little bit 3D. I've got this one that looks like it's a bit flat, maybe almost like you're pushing it. But then there's also, this one is also raised up in sort of 3D, but it turns white. And I think what we might do, I'm trying to decide, do we want to have the buttons just be white, and then when you mouse over them, they turn blue, and when you push, they go down? We might be able to do that. I'm actually a little bit concerned that we might not get things to line up quite right visually to look okay, but we can see what we can do. Anyway, so we've got all three of these. Let's go ahead and start with the white raised version over here. So what are we going to do? Well, what we need to do, I think, for our image is we do have to define a border, if I'm not wrong. Let's go ahead and take a look. Let's say we just assign this blue button to this, right? We can do that. It's got a graphic over here, and sorry, that's the graphic over here, right? The UI sprite. Let's replace it with the white button. So you can see right away, this looks pretty terrible. Why is it looking so terrible and weird and stretched out? That's not what we want at all. Well, the reason is that by default, these images here will, it'll just take the entire image and just stretch it to fill it. But that's not what we want. Instead, we want to have something called like a 9-sliced graphic. Now, if I switch to that right now, it won't work, and it'll tell you the image doesn't have a border. So what is a 9-slice graphic? Basically, we're going to take this one image over here. So I'm going to go back to my image. I'm going to go to the sprite editor, and you can easily imagine slicing this image into 9 bits, where you have one bit that's the top left corner, one bit that's just this sort of top line, and then the top right corner, and then the left border, the middle, the right border, bottom left, bottom, and bottom right. And then if you have that situation, now you're not talking about stretching the entirety of the image anymore. Instead, when you have a sort of rectangle like this that you want to use this image for, instead of just stretching it, what it does is it places the top left corner where it's supposed to be, And then for the top border, it takes the top border bit and it only stretches that and then puts the top right corner where it's supposed to be. And then you don't get the stretched look. Instead, it's basically just the top, bottom, right, and left borders that stretch, and it's just basically a simple line, so that's going to stretch just fine. And then the middle is going to be expanded to fill the remaining space, but again, we just have a solid color here, so that's going to look fine as well. So what you have to do in your sprite, you can tell your sprite that you've got a border, and what we're going to do is we're just going to drag down this rectangle here, or we could type in the numbers if we wanted, but we're going to drag it so that the corners, that's really the one you want to pay attention to. You want to make sure they're nicely separated like this. Now we don't want to end up something like this because this little ticky bit really belongs as part of the corner graphic. So we're just going to drag it that way, and over here we're going to drag it like that, and then the bottom bit over here we're going to pull up, and it looks like that should be okay that way. I suppose for consistency, based on the way it looks at the top, we probably want to give it an extra 1 white pixel over here. That way we've got it nicely done. We're going to apply this. Now, all of a sudden, hey, that's looking pretty good. It's no longer stretched in an inappropriate fashion anymore. The text box isn't quite lined up the way we might want, so what we can do is, probably the easiest is just to raise up the bottom of the text box until it sort of looks like it fits properly. Okay, so now we have this sort of raised white button. All right, that's pretty neat. What do we do if we want it to change when we mouse over, right? If I hit play right now, I can mouse over this, and I can click it. It, pulses gray a bit for a second when I click it, but that's about it. Now, why does it do that? Well, you can see here in our button script, when we press it, it turns that gray. There's no highlight action, although we could do that. I could have it say highlight red when you mouse over it. So as soon as I mouse over, it'll turn red. When I click it, it'll go gray. When I release it, it goes back to red since I'm still hovering over it. And then if I move out, there we go. I don't know why it lost, why it's not getting the focus properly as I move out here. Because it's doing it here, but as soon as I click, then it sort of doesn't work properly until I click off. Oh, I think it has something to do with the way that it gets focused, which might be something in the event system over here that we don't want. What happens if I turn off these input modules? I think that probably will actually be quite poor. Yeah, we don't want to do that. We want to leave this in. Disable the navigation event. There's something, I may not be able to remember exactly what the fix is in this episode here. Might be getting confused about something, but yeah, it's staying locked on focus. Let's worry about that later on. Okay, so we've got a button here, but all we can do is tint it. What we'd really like to do is change the graphic that is used. Again, we can go and program our own thing to do that, but again, this button script has a nice and handy alternate transition. Instead of transitioning between colors, we're going to have it swap animations instead. You can also have to call an animation controller if you've got one on your graphic, but we really won't need that sort of thing. So right now, we've got different sprites we can put in. So we've got our image over here. This image component has your default graphic, and the target graphic is basically just pointing to this image. It's effectively just pointing to itself and its object, right? This is just pointing to this game object here, and then it looks for the image component on there, and it will remember what our basic image is. But then we say, listen, when you highlight it, what should happen? Well, when we highlight it, we're going to switch to the blue button here, the raised blue button. Now, of course, what we're going to have to do is make sure with all of these guys that they have the same sort of sprite border here, right? So if we look at this guy, we've got a left, top, right of 6 pixels, that's our border, and then 10 pixels at the bottom. So let's do exactly the same thing for our blue raised button over here. And these graphics will be available in the download. I guess I could type these in actually. Let's do that. 6, 6, 6, and 10, I think it is. Apply that, and might as well do the press down version at the same time. Although this might need a bit of adjustment because it has sort of a different innate shape because it's not raised up, but we'll deal with that one momentarily. Okay, so we do have a highlighted sprite in there, so if I hit play and then I mouse over, there we go. So now it changes to the blue sprite. This is not a recolor. We're actually changing what graphic is being shown there. Okay, that's good. What happens if we press it? Well, let's go ahead and swap to the press down version. How I wonder if we turn off the navigation, if it'll stop like locking the button. I'll have to Google that between episodes. There we go. It pushes. Yeah, see, there's sort of an inherently different look going on with this button when you push it down. I'm not sure that this is the effect that we're looking for. We might need a slightly different graphic for that. So I'm not sure what we're going to want for the pressed sprite animation. For now, I suppose we'll leave it in there. If I do turn off, I don't think this is it. Like keeping focus on a press. Oh, hold on. Maybe that does work. Excellent. Because what was happening with automatic, so it mouses over, and then I press, and then I mouse out, and it stays locked. This button still has focus, but as soon as I remove the navigation option over here, the button will no longer have focus after it presses, and it'll work the way that I want. Okay, good. The navigation system is just the ability to sort of tab through or use arrow keys to buzz through things. So I'm surprised that turning that off didn't disable it either. Well, I mean, now it's going to be fine. But let's say I turn on... Sorry. Well, we're going to test. We're going to learn some things together. If I put this back to automatic... I think by turning this off, it no longer, if you hit arrow keys, because I think by default, if you hit arrow keys, it might go and tab through all your visual objects. So by turning that off, the event system will ignore arrow keys in terms of selecting UI elements, which is certainly what we want. We definitely want that off. But I guess for our buttons, if we are worried about keeping that focus for some of our transitions, we're going to have to turn this off. I swear there's probably another way to do it, but off the top of my head, I can't remember what it is. We'll see if we can find a more elegant way of doing that. But there we go. So we've got a button. It looks kind of neat. It's not certainly far from perfect, but it's a start. I'll see if I can find some neater graphics for it in the future, or maybe draw something different. But we've got, we've got the hover effect, which is always fun, and then clicking on it does some things as well. Okay, so that's one button. We're obviously going to want two buttons, though. So I'm going to have another button over here. This is going to be for, I don't know, bulldoze? So this is the object name in the hierarchy, and then we're going to change the label as well to bulldoze. Seems reasonable-ish. Now, obviously right now we've got the problems where both of our buttons are overlapping one another. And I can take this bulldoze button and just say scooch it up here, for example, and that would be fine. I can hit play. And then there we go. Now we've got our two buttons. Later on, it might become very tedious to go and hand place all of these buttons. And what we might want to do is put them in some sort of grid or automatic arrangement. We can go ahead and do one of those right away. So right now, both these buttons just belong directly to a canvas. But let's say we put them inside of something else. Let me go and make, really, we could just create an empty. There's no reason I can't do that. A lot of times you might do something like a panel or an image. The only difference between a panel and an image is that by default, a panel will be set to be slightly transparent and will be the size of the full canvas, whereas an image will be generated with like this sort of 100 by 100 size. It's literally the only difference between a canvas and a panel in the UI system. Like literally, I'll create both of them and we can go back through the two. You can see all they do is have an image script on them. It's just that when you create them, one is 100 by 100, the other one is just anchored to all four corners of the screen and will just grow automatically to be the same size and has its color set to be somewhat transparent. Literally no difference between the two. I can change a panel to work exactly the same as an image by setting its alpha all the way up here, change its anchor point, and then there we go. This panel is exactly the same as this image. Literally the same. But in practice, you tend to refer to things internally. The idea is a panel is usually something that's got other stuff in it. For example, the panel might represent a dialog box or a window or the pop-up of a menu or some damn thing like this. So we could put both these guys inside of this panel, and that would be an appropriate way to organize them. But you actually don't even need the panel. I mean, if you have your own background, which we do here, right, we don't actually care about any background whatsoever, which means I could disable this image, right? There's nothing wrong with that, or remove this completely. Although if you're doing that, there's literally no reason on your canvas you can't just create an empty, and then we're going to put both buttons inside of this empty. This is going to be, I don't know, our build menu. And this doesn't have to, like, show anything. Now, it does have a position, and if I take this object now and move it, it's going to move my buttons because the buttons are no longer anchored to the canvas. They are anchored to this build menu. So let's go and put the build menu in a reasonable spot. Let's say we put it in the bottom left corner. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to hold Alt and Shift. We'll set all the pivots and position and everything to the bottom left corner. And then my build floor, again, I could reset it. If I move it to the bottom left corner of the build menu, that's going to go in the right place. And the same thing with bulldoze. We're going to move it there and then scooch it up. Come on. You know, that works great. And then later on, if for any reason I want to move the build menu to some other location, we've got a lot of options for that. But if I add more buttons to this, right, we get a bunch more buttons later on because we've got a bunch more functions, then what am I going to do? Hand place every single one of those? Pfft, I'm way too lazy for that. So how do we get these buttons to get arranged sort of automatically? Well, on our build menu container over here, what we can do is we can add a component. There's 3 types of components that we can use to automatically lay this stuff out. There is the grid layout group. This works best if you are literally doing a grid, like columns and rows, which is not really what we're looking for here. Otherwise, you are going to be looking, I guess I could have just looked up group. Otherwise, you're going to be looking to work with either the horizontal layout group or the vertical layout group. In this case, I'm going to go vertically. So I'm going to do that. And what this is going to do is it automatically places, it moves and resizes all the childs of this build menu in this vertical organization. Now, obviously, these are a little bit swooshed, which is not what we're looking for. But if I go, and I've got the build menu right now, right? Let's say I make it taller. I can do that by just dragging this. You can see it's constantly resizing everything inside of it, which is very cool. Now, depending on exactly what you're looking to do, you might want to just, literally just sort of set a size like this. And I think certainly for our width, setting a size is reasonable. Hell, let's take a nice even number. It's a 149.8. Let's just make it a nice round 150, just to say, makes me a little happier. But then what are we going to want to set the height for? Again, sometimes you might literally want to set a height, but other times you might want a little script that just changes this height. Because, for example, if you want some sort of system for dialog boxes, or pop-up menus like this, what you probably want to do is do a count of how many children we've got, and then set our height to be a multiple of that, right? If we decide, listen, all of our children need, I don't know, what's this example here? We've got 7. Let's say each one of our children need, well, how big is one of these? Currently, it's being auto-calculated to be 33 pixels tall. Great. Let's round it off and say we want all of our children to have 35 pixels of vertical space to go on here. And then the script will say, okay, I've got 7 children. 7 times 35 comes out to... no, I'm not typing in the calculation to Google. I'm doing this all in my head because I'm turbo super smart. 245. 245. And then we set it that way. Right? And then no matter how many children you've got, it automatically updates that, which is pretty cool. Can we do something like this? Absolutely. You'll also note that you might be tempted to do something called ContentSizeFitter, which is very cool, but is not really what you're looking for here. What ContentSizeFitter will do is it will set the size of a container to perfectly fit the children within it. The problem is they don't really work the two together, as far as I can recall, because vertical layout group is actually responsible for setting the size of the children. So you can't set the size of the children and also, like, you're setting the size of the children based on your size and then setting your size based on the size of the children. Obviously, that doesn't really work. There is some other thing here. You could set a, what's it called? What is it called that I'm thinking of? It's not ContentSizeFitter. UI. It's not one of those. Layout? LayoutElement. Okay, you can also use LayoutElement to give a hint to the layout group, right? The vertical layout group, is I can give a hint to these things that, hey, I kind of really need a minimum width or a minimum height. Like, really, we need, this element here needs to be at least 50 pixels tall, no matter what. And there we go. Now we've overridden the behavior. And in fact, you can sort of use this to automatically set things, which is fine. but in this case isn't necessary, right? It's sort of like, it depends on exactly how you're looking to build these and what sort of help you need. In this case, we're going to be perfectly happy with literally just setting the size of the children based on, letting the size of the children be automatic based on setting a height for our parent element. And we can make a script for that if we wanted. You want to make one? Let's go ahead and make one. Let's go and make a script that says set, I don't know, automatic vertical size. Something like that. Okay, we're going to add this script to our build menu. If it'll let me drag it. Try to drag it too fast after making it. It's still compiling. It doesn't let you drag. So we've got this. Let's go ahead and double click on the script. And it's going to be, let's make a function called adjust height or adjust size. We'll call it like this. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to have one public float child height. And we're going to set it to default at 35 because that's what we're looking for right now. So adjust size is going to be very simple. It's going to say this.transform.child count. Okay, that's how many children I've got. So if we multiply this by child height, we get what our personal height is going to be. And this.getComponent rect transform dot size delta dot x is equal to that. Now, we can't actually set it directly, I don't think. I'm pretty sure this is one of those things. If you're running in JavaScript, you can most likely do this, but I suspect this should give us an error. Yeah, we cannot modify it directly. What we have to do is we have to grab a copy of it. It's a vector2. Size is equal to that. We set size.x, or sorry, size.y to be equal to our height. And then we set our size delta to be equal to this size. That should get rid of the error. Okay, so let me go and squish this down right now. And, oh, we have to call this function. Let's call it in the start. Like that. So I squished everything down. As soon as I hit play, it should run the start and reset the size. And it does. Sets it to make sure that we've got enough room for every one of our children to be 35 pixels tall. Do note that if you did set in your vertical layout, if you set any sort of spacing between elements, then things will get a little bit weird. Because this literally says there's going to be 2 pixels between each. And so what's going to happen here, this child height's not actually going to be, we're not actually going to have 35 pixels per child, because we're still going to do 7 times 35 is 245. We set our height to 245, but then there's the spacing in between. Now, you could alter your script here to actually check to see if there's a spacing and then add that into this variable here, or just note the fact that, like, okay, well, this, our child's not actually going to be 35 pixels tall. It'll be 35 pixels minus the spacing in between. And furthermore, minus any sort of padding at the top and bottom of the entire vertical group that you've got. So that is fine. The other thing you can do is here we only have it show up when we actually run the game, right? Right? This only shows up when we run the game. Maybe we don't want that. Maybe it would be very nice if this also ran in the editor. Wouldn't that be lovely? Well, there's a very easy way to do that, actually. Let's take a naive approach at first. The most naive approach will be to do something like execute in edit mode over here. So we're telling the Unity system this whole script runs while we are in the editor over here. The start will run, and also the update. You can see already it's updated. As soon as it compiles, as soon as it recompiled the script, it ran the start again, which called that. Now, if I do change the height, oh, yeah, no, of course it updates this right away, but it means I can change the height, but this is obviously not running, right? If I go and duplicate a child, it's not updating that. So what we can do is put our adjust size, we can move it into update over here, like that. So now, it'll recompile, and then every frame, it's going to go and do that. So if I go ahead and duplicate these guys, you can see my height on my build menu is obviously changing because of that. Or if I go to my build menu and say, you know what, 35 pixels is too much for these buttons. Let's drop it down to about 30. There we go, 30 pixels per button. You know what? I really like the 35 much better. So now it's running in edit mode. Now the downside to this is right now it's running every single frame, which is obviously not great. So the question is, can we add a button to that to get it to automatically resize? Yes, you can. You can actually, in your script, you can have a button here that will run a function. Inspector button. I'm just pulling up some syntax here because I never remember it properly. So I've got to have the syntax right next door. So how do you get a button to show up on this inspector? So first of all, we're going to move some of this stuff back. We are going to say, sure, you can adjust size on start, but that's it. I mean, these buttons, the number of buttons should never change on the fly, not while the program is running. And in fact, do we even want the execute and edit mode? No, not really. But when we actually run the game for the first time, we do want this script to run the start, and we want it to run adjust size. Okay? Groovy. Excellent. So the question is, how do we get a button in the editor that when we click the button, it will run this function? So that way, if we do change the number of buttons and things like that, or we change some of the stats, we can hit a button to update it in the editor then. That way, something's not running consistently. Well, to do that, we actually need another script. Okay, we can't have it be part of the same script, which always annoyed me just a scooch, which is too bad. But we do need another script. So we need, I think we need to put it in a specific folder, don't we? Don't we need to put it in the editor folder? Well, let's go ahead and get started over here, and we'll see. So what we need to do is we need to make a new script. I'll just make it in this UI folder, but I don't think it'll work. So this script can be called anything, but let's call it something like automatic vertical size editor. A lot of people will do that. This is indicative of a script that runs in the editor mode. Okay, so this thing here, we've got to add an extra using over here, using Unity editor. This gives us a new set of classes and things that we can work with. And instead of deriving from mono behavior, what we want to do here is derive from editor. Okay, we're not actually going to attach this to an object. It's not a mono behavior that way. And then we have to tell it what object this editor function is supposed to modify. What class is it supposed to work with? And so that we have the square bracket function here, custom editor, type of, and then we give it a type. And what we're going to be messing around with is this type. When we have something in the inspector of type automatic vertical size, this is going to modify how it works. And in particular, we don't need these functions. We need a function, public override, on inspector GUI. All right. Oh, I don't like that bracket system. I like this bracket system. Come on, mono behavior or mono develop. What are you doing for me? I like that. I know, source of holy wars, but there you go. So this function gets called to draw GUI elements, and it doesn't use it using the old GUI system. That sort of classic, what do you call it, like immediate mode GUI system in Unity, which wasn't great, but it actually works fine. So anyway, first thing we got to do is tell it, listen, go ahead, draw the default inspector, right? This automatic vertical size component. Let's say we just left this out. Let's actually try to see what happens if I run it now. I suspect... Yeah, see, I think it's got to be in a folder. I think it can be anywhere. It can be in any subfolder, but I think it's got to be in a folder called editor. Let me put it in there. Now, let me click over here on build menu. Aha! See how it's completely blank? And I'm pretty sure, let me go and put it back in UI. And then click on build menu. There we go. Yeah, see? An instance of it couldn't be created. It's got to be in the assets editor folder. So this script here, our editor modification script, has to be in a folder called editor. It can be on the root. It can be inside of a folder. You can have multiple folders called editor all over the place in your project. But this has to exist in a folder called editor. Because what happens is in the editor here, the editor looks in your project at any folder called editor and then runs scripts inside of those effectively. But now if I click on build menu, you can see I've got nothing over here. I can't change anything. I can't set that 35 pixels anymore, right? I don't get the information I normally get. But if I go ahead and, oh, probably because I moved the file and it got confused. Open this up again. There you go. If I uncomment this, if I include draw default inspector, and then go to the build menu, now our classic inspector is over here. But it's clearly we can override what gets shown here. So by doing this, we get the normal stuff that we always want to have, so that's good. And then we're going to add a bouton. So the old GUI system is really easy to work with buttons. You do, whoops, you go GUI layout. That way, because you could just use the GUI dot and then do some stuff, but GUI layout makes sure that you're in the proper layout of the current setup, which isn't the way we want it. And we can make a button. And we list, this is a button, like this, right? And we just do this, and then we pop back over, and we look at the build menu as soon as it recompiles. There, now we have a button. Hey, check it out. Now, how do we do stuff with this button? Well, it's very simple. Whenever this button gets pushed, it'll return true inside of this onInspector GUI. So if this, that means the button got pushed. So let's call this something like recalc size. All right, we'll label the button to that, recalc size. And what are we going to do? Well, we have, although again we just closed it, in our automatic vertical size class over here, we have this adjust size function. First, let's make this public. Then, over here, we just want to run that function. We want to run automatic adjust size on this object. How do we get a copy of that script? Well, within this function, within this object, this script of automatic vertical size editor, we have a variable called target. And the target is literally pointing to the instance of automatic vertical size, this, right? The instance of this that is in question. So this is points to that. However, by default, I think it's just an object, so we have to cast it. So we have to cast it to an automatic vertical size like this. So we have to tell our script at this point, like, this is the class of this target object. But then I can call adjust size, like so. And if that's confusing to you, I mean, I could change it up a bit and say, my script equals that, right? And then something like this. It's equivalent, except here we're making a temporary variable. So now, when this button gets pushed, we grab a copy of our script and run this. Let's see what that looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and delete all these extra bits, all these extra buttons. Now we just have 2 buttons, and they're huge. Now, if I hit start, this will get resized properly. Good. Okay. Excellent. But then that's the way it is here. But now if I just hit this button, recalc size, boom. All it does is it calls that one function that resets the height. Now part of me is wondering, do we even need to run the adjust height on start? I don't know. I guess it's fine. And again, here, if we make some extra buttons, we do that, and then we can recalc the size. Now, what we could do is we could also run a check. We could have made it, instead of doing this this editor class, we could have in here said, run an editor, run on the update, check to see if the number of childs count, or just run adjust size every time. But I don't like the idea, even though it's a really simple function, I don't like the idea of a function that runs every frame if it doesn't need to be, especially if it's making a new variable like this, because then it'll require more garbage cleanup, all kinds of stuff. And mostly, this was an excuse to look at, hey, how can you customize your inspector? Doing stuff like this is amazingly cool. This is a really trivial example of something that's really not that difficult for us to just, do on our own. I could be like, okay, well, there's 2 of them. I know I want my things to be about 35 high, so I guess I'll just type in 70 over there. But come on, we're programmers. We don't type things in like that. We get the computer to do it for us, and that's exactly what happened here. And we'll appreciate it later on if, when we develop our menu system a bit further, most likely we will have these menus sort of auto-populate from a data source in some way. For example, consider the fact later on we might want to make our game moddable, in which case we might not know all the furniture in the game, right? Well, we're going to think like, okay, there's going to be walls, doors, tables, chairs, sofas, beds, that sort of thing. But then maybe people want to mod in flower pots. So now, how do we make sure there's a button for flower pots? Well, instead of having our menu built ourselves in the editor here like this maybe it reads all the objects from a text file, right? We have some sort of text configuration file in some sort of format, I don't know, XML or JSON or something like that, and that defines all the objects that we have in the game. So someone can mod it by simply adding more stuff to that file, and then when the game boots, what it will do is it will read from there. Right, so we might have a dynamic menu system that way. And that's great when the game is running, but again, in the editor, you sort of want to be able to get a preview for that. So by using these sort of classes and some buttons to automate things, we can do that. And in particular, it's really nice with the user interface because there's a few different ways that you can sort of mess about with things here, and it's really cool. Note, we could even have these buttons here for something like the world controller. Like maybe we want to be able to, when we hit play here, right? And we get this visual of the world. Well, what we could do is we could have a component over here, a script that tunes this world controller so that we can spawn a world in the editor and then take a look around and then mess with some stuff or whatever. Lots and lots and lots of options with these editor controls, but for now we've got that. And whenever we want to make a tweak, right, set it to 45, recalc size. You can also change the system so that it actually hooks into these little boxes, and if you change the number, like if I type in 50, it would automatically run some other function at that point as you change things, basically. It's not necessarily that it responds to a change, it's that instead of letting the default inspector run itself, you are manually operating the actual text fields, and you're responsible for storing the data from the text field back into the actual variable. But that gives you an opportunity to look at, like, well, what's the existing variable and what's the new one? Okay, they're different. Good, then we're going to run something. But for now, that's going to suit us perfectly well. So we got those two buttons. Let's go ahead, and this is a bit of a long tutorial because I'm babbling a bit too much, but let's actually make these buttons do something, because right now they definitely don't. So how to make a button do something in the Unity GUI system. Let me go ahead and collapse this stuff so we can focus entirely on this button script. You've got this bit over here called onClick. And I also mentioned, if you ever want to tie in to these more directly, you can also add an event trigger object or a component to your button, or really anything in the UI system, and then tell it what kind of event you want to sort of capture and then trigger from. But in our case, we don't need that. The fact that the button automatically is prepped to handle click events is all we care about in this particular situation. So list is empty. So for build floor, we're going to hit plus. And then what it wants is an object. We have to drag an object from the hierarchy over here. This is the object that will get signaled whenever this button gets clicked. For now, even though this isn't terribly maybe accurate in the way we want to organize it, I'm going to go ahead and put the mouse controller in there, because right now the mouse is responsible for doing the drawing, right? We click and drag. That's the mouse controller that handles that. And right now, then the mouse controller, when you release the drag, puts a floor tile down. Well, so we should probably let it know if we want to be placing floor or destroying floor, right? So button build floor, we're going to notify the mouse controller, and same thing with the bulldozer. I'm going to hit plus over here, and we're going to drag that in. But that's only part of it. What it needs to know is, yes, we're going to send a signal to this mouse controller object, but what function are we going to call on it? We've got a bunch of different functions. Some of them are built in, like we can call stuff on the game object part of it, the transform part of it, or the mouse controller part of it. Well, mouse controller is what we want, and we can call any function here. We can actually even set some properties and variables and stuff. But clearly, we need a function inside of mouse controller to call when those buttons get clicked. And we'll probably make, a lot of changes to this in the future, and as things get more complex in terms of what our menu system is. But for now, let's just make a couple of really simple functions. They do have to be public. They don't return anything. And we're going to call it, I don't know, set mode build floor. I'm going to take a really sort of verbose name over here. It doesn't need to take any parameters. You can go and take in, say, like a float or something like that. Like if I do something like this, right? And I save this. And then I check my build floor button over here. And what function am I going to call? Under mouse controller, I'm going to call set mode build floor, and I'm going to pass it a value of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can do that. You can pass these sorts of things there. Now, in this case, we don't need to pass anything in. I'm just going to leave this blank. So it's just going to be a function that gets called by itself. And we're going to make another version of it that's called bulldoze to destroy things. So I've got two functions. They don't take any parameters, and I want them to get called on those buttons. So let's make sure this gets updated. So the bulldoze mouse controller is going to call set mode bulldoze, and this one here, see, yeah, it lost that function because this is even though it's got the same sort of function name, it is a different function. We're going to set mode build floor. There we go. So these buttons will now call those functions when clicked. And whoops, meant to save, not duplicate. And what are these functions going to do? Well, right now, how do we build the floor? Well, right over here, this is our update dragging, and when we release the mouse button, which is what happens here, we set the tile type to floor. Well, so this can be as very simple. This could be something like tile.tileType build mode tile. Something like this, and it'll default to floor. That's what we're going to start with. And instead of setting the tile type here directly to floor, we're going to set it to this thing, build mode tile. And then all we have to do in these two functions is we say, listen, when we click this button, we set the tile type to floor. And when we click this button, we set the tile type to empty. Let's give that a try. Let's hit play. So the default mode is to build floor, which we've got. Good. Now if I click bulldoze instead, and then I drag out that way, and then if I click floor again, we're going to do that. That's great. Now there is technically one tiny little glitch over here. Let's say, okay, notice right here, this is all empty tiles, right? Well, now they're full. If I go bulldoze, now they're there. If I hit floor, they go there. What happens if I hit bulldoze and I sort of click and drag over here? You can see, like, I'm dragging over the button. It's still doing things. Is that really what we want? Right? If I do this, or even worse, like if I just, I'm in bulldoze mode and I literally, so right now it's all, right over here, it's all floor. And I just click this set floor button, build floor, and then we move. Oh, it's actually okay. Which I'm not sure why. Now, see, there we go. Sometimes it will delete tiles in those. And why is it? Well, because I'm clicking the button, and yet it's sort of bulldozing through. That's not what we want. What's happening is, right now, in our mouse controller script, we're literally just checking, is the button going down? Is the button going up? At no point are we checking, hey, is this button sort of over the UI? Like, because the user interface covers the back of the screen, but we're not doing like any sort of ray casting. And even if we did, the UI system sort of exists on its own layer, so it wouldn't really interact. How do we know? We clearly do not want this stuff to be running if our mouse is over a user interface element. It's actually really easy to figure that out. So over here, update dragging, let's do like a quick little bypass. If we are over a UI element, bail out. We just want to stop. So what I believe I need to do is I need to say using event system or UI events. Ooh, which one is it? I can't remember. And then there's also UI that I can bring in. Unity UI mouse over. I just have to remember which one to include to be simpler, because it's an easy function. Oh, come on. It's events. So I think it's just events. Well, we'll get an error one way or another, and then we'll figure it out. Okay. Anyway, what we care about is we want to grab a copy of the current event system, right? So in our world, we've got this event system, and this is responsible for tracking mouse movement, clicks, and everything like that from a user interface perspective. And so this knows, I mean, clearly we know if we're over a button because we have the buttons hover, right? So there's something that knows if we're over a UI element. All right, so to detect if we're over a user interface element, what we have to do is we have to hook into the event system over here. The event system is the bit of the Unity user interface stuff, the new UI system that was introduced in 4.5 or 4.6 or whenever it was. This thing is responsible for knowing if you are over a UI element, which, you know, something is clearly tracking because of this, and also if you know things are clicking or whatever. So what we want to do is we want to ask this event system, hey, am I over a user interface element? So what we need to do is we do need to do another using over here. Using, it's part of the Unity engine. It used to be everything in Unity was just in Unity engine, but now they are finally farming things out to slightly different namespaces, which is a good idea. But then you have to make sure to include some stuff, otherwise it won't quite work. So we're going to say, listen, we need to use some stuff from the event system over here. And then in our update dragging code, all we're going to do is say, listen, if we're over a UI element, then bail out from this. In other words, we're not going to do any mouse interaction stuff if the mouse is actually over a user interface element. So if, well, we actually need to grab a reference to our event manager system. So in our event system class, here's something. Let me diverge for a moment here. You've probably done this quite frequently, where you can go something like camera.main.stuff. This is a shortcut to automatically grab the camera that is flagged as being the main camera. Now, we can do something very similar to that with the event system, because there's one current event system. We say event system not current. That way we don't have to find the object. We don't have to, do anything sort of crazy wonky to find it. Because event system, it's got this event system script over here, right? I could find the object called event system in my game and then grab this component from it, which is really what we're looking for. But it's much more convenient for us to say, listen, event system not current. And then it's got a function called is pointer over game object. In this case, the game object is specifically like a user interface enabled game object, something that takes in event system events. Buttons do that, and anything with that, so anything with the button script does it, and anything with the event trigger script does it as well. And if you happen to, when you write your own scripts, like let's say, oh, I can't actually load this up. I can't load this button script up. Well, that's really unfortunate. I was hoping to be able to do that. But you can add interfaces to your scripts for things that are supposed to be UI objects that capture certain UI events. And I think that will add you to the list of valid is pointer over game object stuff. Don't quote me on it, but I'm pretty sure that is the situation. So if it's over some sort of, if the mouse pointer is over some sort of UI-based game object, then just bail out. Just return right away. We're not going to do any drag and drop sort of functions at that point. We're not going to do anything. So let's give it a go. I need to hit pause. Stop. Unpause. There we go. Thank you. Let's give it a go. So right now, everything still works over here. I can click and do that. I can click on bulldoze, then do that. That's good. So the big question is, if I sit here and spam this sort of bulldoze button, at no point is it deleting anything behind it, which is great. Now, so you might end up in some situations where something's not quite doing the thing that you want. For example, I'm in bulldoze mode right now, which is great. If I do this and end up on top of the bulldoze button, you can see that the little like drag preview is no longer previewing as I quickly make the jump over here. And if I release, well, nothing happens because this release happened while I was dragging over here. So you may want to make, somewhat smarter behaviors, slightly smarter choices based on whatever you're doing based on that. For example, maybe we still want the drag to continue when we're over bulldoze, right? That might be reasonable. So maybe we don't want to bail out right away. Maybe we still want to do something, like we'll still update the dragging graphic. And maybe if you're already dragging and you release the mouse button, even if you're over a UI element, maybe you should still take the action, for example. That might be very reasonable, right? But you probably don't want to start a drag when you're doing that. So you might want to have some sort of flag of because we don't have a flag right now, right? We just assume if you're releasing a mouse button, you must have started a drag. But maybe right here we want to set some sort of flag like a Boolean is dragging. And so here we say, okay, if mouse button just went down, we're supposed to be starting a drag and not over is pointer, right? And not is pointer over game object. Then we do something like is dragging equals true or something like that. And then we do more logic based on that. We're just gonna leave this be for now, because we'll probably restructure it later. Right now it works-ish. In fact, we may not even need this. The ability to sort of click through your your user interface isn't necessarily game breaking one way or another, but it's an issue that some people will be concerned about. So I want to at least cover it very quickly right now. So there we go. So now you can't finish it if you do that, and these buttons don't really do anything. It leads to some sort of weird, funny visual stuff, but there you have it. All right, folks, thank you very much for watching this episode, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you very much to all the November supporters over at patreon.com/Quill18creates, and to these mic check level supporters. We've got Alex, we've got Wes Oldenbiving, we've got Andrew, we've got Craig Mortel, Philip Nichols, Neil Blakely Milner, we've got Speedy Savant, we've got Valiant Cake Fiend, Radel Del Peso, Aaron Toivson, maybe? Marius Fieldvold, Tim, Julian Auger Lafont, Steven Stager, or Stagger, we've got Michael McClintock, and Bunny, and also everyone who's just watched, shared, favorited, subscribed these videos. You really make a massive difference when it comes to keeping the series going and making everything just interesting and awesome. And just thanks for watching and thanks for supporting. See you next time, folks.